thanks for joining us. Today, we are excited to bring you a new topic. We're going to focus on energy grid modernization, a conversation on future-proofing your investment. And today, I have my colleague, Stefan, with me. And Stefan, if you could please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Stefan Richter. I'm located in Switzerland, and I'm with Red Hat for half a year now. I'm the grid modernization strategist, and this is because I have a background in the industry. I worked for ABB for a couple of years, or quite a lot of years, and now I'm with Red Hat, and I'm happy to present today this topic.
Great. So let's dive right in. To get started, Stefan, I thought let's talk about the evolution in power grid modernization. So you tell us a little bit about where are we now and where are we headed?
So yeah, this is a very interesting question to begin with, because it is a very diverse picture. If we look around the industry, there are some utilities that are like basically not very much advanced in what they're doing. We see utility substations without any infrastructure, any compute infrastructure so far. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we see utilities that try to move ahead, that really try to bring in modern technologies into their power grids. And then, of course, in the middle between these two, I think we see a majority of utilities that have kind of traditional computing technologies in there. Maybe they don't even speak about computing technologies yet. They call it secondary equipment. And that kind of gives us the idea what this is originally about. It's a secondary equipment that is supposed to support primary equipment, concretely to protect primary equipment, big transformers, for example, or using breakers in there, controlling the substations, controlling the power grid. That is kind of what compute technology today is supposed to do in the power grid. And if we think about what we could do in power grids, all the data we can take out from the substations or from other places in the power grid, and the things we could do with this data, for example, then we see that there is quite a bit to do still. And I think this is also due to the fact that we have this IT-OT divide, as we call it. So we have IT that is already very advanced, and then we have OT that, let's say, is lagging a bit behind in this innovation. And this is our mission, to actually close this gap and bring OT to the same level that IT is operating on today.
Got it. So obviously a lot of opportunity, and you spoke about the OT to IT, and I wonder if you could drill down a bit on some of the additional drivers, just thinking about from a true business value perspective, or even some of the technical challenges that are being faced as you think about what's driving some of this change.
Yes, there are many drivers of this change. I think everybody has heard about the energy transition that is happening at the moment. And I think there are many drivers that are really related to the business. For example, one of the biggest, I think, is that we have a big lack of skilled workforce. We really miss people in the industries, everywhere actually, skilled people that can drive change, that can bring in new technologies, that can deal with these technologies, that can manage novel systems, for example. And this is something that can be addressed, for example, by reusing standard technologies, because standard technologies are, as they suggest, they're easier to learn, they're already spread out. So maybe it is a good idea to not always go for specialized things, but trying to use standard technologies as much as possible. Then, of course, we have the problems that come from the energy revolution, let's say, or the energy transition. This is in particular that we have lots more decentralized energy resources. We have better energy storage, for example. We have new small solar panels everywhere. We have wind power that is not necessarily very close to the grid. So we have lots of things that need to be integrated into the grid. And if we look at all these projects that people want to do and the capacity that the grid has at the moment, then we see that there is a big gap. And this is also because of the innovation lag that we see. Then, especially in Europe, we have more governmental regulation. There is a need for more data transparency. There is a need for cybersecurity, resilience, for example, and so on. So already from external factors and the business factors, we see a lot of challenges in there. And then if we go on to technical challenges, then we see that like security is for sure the biggest factor. It's like nearly 100% of all utilities actually see security as one of their biggest challenges. But it's not the only thing. The question is also why innovation is not moving forward. And one reason for that, of course, is that we see vendor lock-in. There are many devices that can often only be replaced by devices of the same vendor. Sometimes even you have to use the same model again. So that kind of inhibits innovation. We see also a very big coupling of hardware and software. This is, of course, the traditional way of doing things. We bring in a device and the device does something. Whereas in IT, for example, we think about this already completely differently. We think more about functionality that needs to run somewhere. And with this come, of course, high development costs. We see that the cost of creating new devices, so to bring in new innovation, the cost of this is very high for companies developing new systems. Of course, there are very strong requirements towards reliability. There are requirements that we don't have in other industries, like real-time requirements and so on, that make it expensive. But it is also due to the fact that the way things are developed are a bit different than they are in other domains. And therefore, I think we need to really think about what we can do as Red Hat or as other companies also in this area to improve the situation, to help companies develop software faster and bring value faster to the end customers.
Great. That was great background. And I would love for you to elaborate more around how we can ensure that we're bringing value and thinking about the future-proofing your investments. So for anybody watching today that's thinking about modernizing, what advice do you have for people who want to invest, but also want to make sure that that investment is still relevant 10 or 20 years from now as well?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think this is what everybody is thinking about, right? I want to invest something. I want to spend money on something that is new and helps me, that is modern, but there is kind of this fear that in 10, 20 years, this is not modern anymore. And I think if we turn this whole picture a bit around and we don't think too much in terms of like, I want to buy devices and these devices fulfill some function, but I think more about like, I have functionality and this functionality somehow needs to run somewhere, then I'm getting a bit closer to seeing how things can be done in the future and it will be done in the future. So in the future, I think we will have the same approach as we have in IT today, that we are thinking about like, okay, so I have this functionality and it needs to run on some compute infrastructure. And who's providing this compute infrastructure? This is, of course, operations. And by decoupling the software development and the deployment of the software, we're already getting in the right direction. And now if we look at what our business actually is in Red Hat, it's open source, right? We're talking about open source. And open source enables this. Open source has the strong separation of concerns, strong separation of development and deployment, for example. So what I would suggest is invest in compute infrastructure and look for companies that can actually cater for this, so that they bring you innovation in terms of software and get away from this coupling of hardware and software. Then the other thing is that we see also very often is that people are trying to do things by themselves. So we call this do-it-yourself approach, which works for many people to a certain extent. But if you think about maybe an analogy in the car industry, so maybe you think it's a good idea that you develop your own car and you care for your own car because you have the competencies. But then as things get more and more complex, you want to bring in more components into your car, like an airbag, for example, or like a car radio, or like whatever cool things you can think of in your car, right? Then you think about, okay, now I need to develop an airbag by myself, and that is maybe not what you want to do, right? So therefore, you think more and more about like taking components together and putting this into your car. But then you see that your car is getting more and more complex, and you don't really understand anymore how to deal with all of these components inside your car. And that's why it makes sense to actually think about, am I really in the car business? Do I want to create cars, maintain cars, or am I just in the driving business where I want to bring stuff from place A to place B, right? And I think many companies are actually in the driving business and not necessarily in the car making business. And therefore, it's better to actually turn to companies that are specialized in this, like Red Hat. Maybe we can also say that Red Hat has 22,000 employees, and of these 22,000 employees, about the half or more than the half are actually engineers. So you really need to think about, like, what can you do with the engineers that you have compared to such a big offering as we can offer with this combined expertise of so many developers. And plus, and this is very important for me, we tap into more than 1 million open source projects. So we contribute to these projects. We are very active. We lead many of these projects. We drive these projects. So we have all this know-how of the open source world at our disposal, and we actually integrate this into enterprise-ready software projects or products. Sorry.
Great, thank you. And so, great background. Obviously, we're both with Red Hat, but for those who are listening, can you give us a drill down on specifically? We've talked about Red Hat's value and the value that open source brings, but where is Red Hat aligned specifically to this particular industry? How are we supporting modernization efforts today? And what is Red Hat's vision for the future, and how are we supporting the vision that you spoke about?
Yeah, so I think the most obvious thing, of course, for this industry is that we are a member of the VPAC Alliance. We are a partner of the pave initiative. These are two initiatives that are very much directed towards substation automation. So we can say, like, okay, we are really directly involved with the people that are driving change in this industry. But we also have lots of customers in the area, mostly on the IT side, and we're moving now over to the OT side. So we're bringing in our expertise from the IT side over to the OT side. And maybe what people really usually don't realize is that we have a very big ecosystem of partners. So we really have lots of hardware partners, for example, that certify their hardware with us so that we can actually say, look, if you take this particular server and you run Red Hat Enterprise Linux on this server, we can guarantee that it will work. That is an approach that you do not get if you have do-it-yourself Linux, of course, because these certifications will not be available to you. And then, of course, we have this open platform approach. We have these open source values. This is really ingrained in our DNA. We are a company that works with many, many projects, also in substation automation. As I mentioned already, the CPAF initiative is something that is very, very interesting for us, where we are also driving change. And we're also engaged in the LF Energy, umbrella project, where we can provide additional value. But you also ask about how we see the future. And I think the future will be that, as I said before, there will be much more secondary equipment, and maybe we get away from this term secondary equipment and talk about compute infrastructure. We're talking about that there will be infrastructure to run computations in the future. And this infrastructure needs to be taken care of. This infrastructure needs to be managed, it needs to be secure, it needs to be reliable, and so on. So I think that utilities will more and more outsource this dealing with this infrastructure to companies like Red Hat, or to service companies that work with Red Hat. They will standardize on RHEL, they will standardize on technologies like OpenShift, because they will just see how much more easy it is to actually get things done and to get innovation and value into substations. And I think that actually makes the whole thing future-proof, because if you look at IT, where's all the value coming from? Today and in the future, it's coming from software that is deployed on some commodity hardware.
Great. Stefan, we are at time. Thank you so much. This was really insightful information, and I greatly appreciate your perspective that you've brought to the conversation today. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.